Hello, this is Intersections, where faith, business, and politics meet. With us today is a beautiful young African-American sister, Miss Amara Enyia.
Perfect.
Did I get it right?
You got it perfect.
So, before we get into the politics of the moment, tell us about yourself. Who are you? Where do you come from?
Yes. Well, my story always starts with my parents. So I come from a family of immigrants. My parents are from Nigeria.
Nigeria?
Yes, from Nigeria. And they also are the origins of my activism. So I've worked a lot in organizing and activism, but my parents were very involved politically in Nigeria. Both my parents fought in Nigeria's civil war. Time against Nigeria, and they continued organizing even after they came to the United States and were working and living in the Chicago area for years. And so I came up with myself, it's me and 5 other siblings, and we all came up going to the meetings that my parents were having, the press conferences, listening to the long conversations at night. That's how we came up. And they were very intentional about the values of our responsibility to our family, to our community, to stand up for what's right, and always to speak truth to power, and always.
Wait a minute! Whoa! Now you get into the political stuff. So what high school? You don't have to go to grammar school. What high school did you go to?
So I actually went to Crete High School. It's a far south suburbs. So I went to Crete. Was a multiple sport athlete in the golden years, as I like to think of it. Then I went to U of I at Urbana-Champaign, and I did a couple of bachelor's degrees there, my master's. I went to law school there. I also did my Ph.D. In educational policy
All out
studies.
of the University of Illinois?
All in Central Illinois.
They put me out of there. I
Really?
flunked out my first year.
Oh wow! Oh wow!
Right. Yeah.
Well, it was a good experience. Interesting dynamics in Central Illinois. A lot of my organizing work I was doing actually started in Champaign, of all places, and just continued when I left. But went to U of I, and then I came back as I was finishing my PhD and started working in government here in Chicago.
Now, I want to kind of move to another place, and that is this activism. And I want you to, again, just if you will, in our next segment, I want you to repeat the foundation out of which you decided that you would, after law school, that you were going to get actively involved in, I assume, influencing public and private policy.
Yes.
But we're going to have to take a short break.
Sure.
And when we come back, we're going to see you, and we're going to talk more with Miss Amara Enyia. Stay with us. So let's kind of get a sense now of where you get started as it relates to being motivated to engage in the efforts to organize and to make a difference out here. Where do you get that from?
So I definitely think that I get that from my parents, having witnessed their organizing and witnessed their activism and their commitment to something that was bigger than themselves.
You have immigrant parents, right?
Yes.
And where they come from?
So my parents are from Nigeria.
Nigeria.
Yeah, so they came from Nigeria to the U.S.
Okay,
Yes.
Go ahead. So.
Yes, and so they were very deeply involved in Nigeria. Again, they both were involved in the Civil War. My dad and my mom were Igbo, and so at the time the Igbo were trying to secede from Nigeria, and of course they didn't win, and so it was very difficult in the country. But they
wrote some serious history.
They certainly did.
Right.
I mean, it was 50 years. I think last year was the 50th anniversary of the Biafra War, and so it was just a time of reflecting on what it meant for the country and what it meant for a generation that's still alive that witnessed and experienced war. And the aftermath of war, and so for them to have come to the United States, and when they came to the Chicago area, they continued their organizing.
So we tend to think of our struggle as Black folk here in the United States of America is all about the civil rights movement, slavery here, but nobody ever remembers or understands the harshness that was experienced by our people on the continent of Africa.
Certainly, and the impact of colonialism. The impact that it has had back then until today is very real, and it exists around the world. And so it's about connecting our our struggles, like there's solidarity in our shared struggle.
Amen, amen, amen.
My earliest experiences and memories of activism was just witnessing my parents and working with them and helping them and seeing how they lived their values, and they lived by example. They were the example of what it means to speak to truth to power, to challenge the status quo, to do so even when it was inconvenient and even dangerous, and sometimes, especially in the later years in the 90s when we had dictators in Nigeria, and there was a lot of things, people were being executed, it was just a lot of things going on, but they did not waver in their commitment, and they were doing a lot of that right here in Chicago. So for me, for myself and for my siblings, those values were what were deeply embedded in us, and it reflected in everything that we decided to do once we went to school. The question is, okay, how are you going to use your gifts and your talents? And for me, it's always been with an eye towards service and toward community, and especially marginalized communities, groups that are overlooked, groups that are ignored, groups that are marginalized. That's where the most work needs to be, and so my career has pretty much been in that space.
For the Black community, given our struggle here in the city of Chicago, you can worry about the President of the United States of America, worry about the United States Senate, worry about the United States Congress. But for Black folk in the city of Chicago, the office of mayor is really the one that they feel and touch the most.
Yes.
And so in our next segment, I want us to get into the reason why you ran for mayor.
Sure.
We're going to be right back in a few minutes, and we're going to get into a deeper discussion around the mayoral race here in the city of Chicago. And I want you to stay with us, and my guest, of course, is Miss Amara Enyia. Stay with us. With us again, we have Miss Amara. So at some point, you'd made a decision out of your activism, I gather, working to influence public policy, to run for office. And so you ran or decided to run for the office of mayor. So what made that happen?
Well, it was a sense of two things. One, a sense of urgency about the issues that we were facing in Chicago that I had seen just as a resident, but also because I had worked in government. I saw at those top levels how policies were being created and the disconnect between those who make policy and those of us who are affected by those policies.
And what level of government had you worked in that you had a chance to see this?
So I started in the mayor's office. I actually started off as a fellow. That was when I was finishing my dissertation, I moved back to Chicago and started working in the mayor's office. And it was because I was very intentional. I wanted to see, I had these questions about why things were the way they are in Chicago. And to me, it made sense that in the mayor's office, that's the sort of the heart of where everything happens.
So you served as an intern in the...
Yeah, I started off as a fellow there.
Fellow.
Yep, and I was a generalist, so that pretty much meant that I got to work in almost every area of policy, everything from housing to violence prevention, education, food security, pretty much every policy area I got an opportunity to work in.
So now you're getting ready to run for mayor.
Yes.
So you jump in. So how did that
2
feel?
feet.
How did that feel?
I mean, Chicago politics is known around the world for what it is. And so this was an eye-opening. I didn't go in naive about what it was, but it's certainly being in it and seeing it from the inside. It really shows you both why things are the way they are, but also why things need to change, why there's so much need to change how things are in Chicago. So it was a motivating experience in the sense that, so there has to be a better way, and there is a better way. I always ran into this barrier in my policy work and even in my organizing work. You get individuals who simply don't have the same values. And if they're in office and they don't have the same values, then it's almost impossible to get them to pass legislation that you need, or to get them to understand why certain policies need to be in place or don't need to be in place. And so you're constantly running up against that brick wall. And so for me, I think that we should feel a sense of entitlement about being in those decision-making positions so that we can have individuals who share our values, who can create the kind of policies that can enhance our quality of life in the city. And then there's a sense of urgency because things really do need to change. People need to be able to believe in the legitimacy of government and believe that things can be better for themselves.
Okay, so you're in the race. And you've got 14 other candidates that are running for this august office of the mayor of the city of Chicago. I want to talk a bit about it during our next segment, about your experiences there. And of course, we want to get into what's next, right? And so towards a sense of getting one grounded in what you experienced on the campaign trail, and the ups and the downs.
Oh man!
And then we want to get to what's next. So just hold your horses right there. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to pick up our conversation about now getting into the nitty-gritty of running for mayor of the city of Chicago from Miss Amara's point of view. Stay with us. So, Ms. Amara, let me kind of put it this way. We've talked about getting into the race, but with 14 candidates and having to file your petitions to get on the ballot, be interested to hear what you think about that. Because there are people that want to know what it's like to run for the office of mayor of the city of Chicago. From a personal point of view. So let's get at that.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's certainly not for the faint of heart. I can say that off top. There are so many challenges, even to simply getting on the ballot. You need 12,500 signatures to get on, which is more than every other major city in this country. It's extremely expensive to amass the resources to do that. And then if you get on the ballot, you might get challenged. Now, we were fortunate to have been very creative about the ways that we collected our signatures, because we already knew that we weren't going to have party infrastructure behind us. We weren't going to have millions of dollars behind us. We just had the strength of our message and incredibly committed and creative people. And so we were able to collect almost 5 times what you need to get on the ballot, and we weren't challenged, which was a huge deal for us because it meant that we didn't have to be distracted with being down at the Board of Elections, going through our signatures. But there are also, with 14 candidates, you really have to get your message out and you have to distinguish yourself from the rest of the field. And so we were able to, we had a very strong, powerful message about the vision for Chicago moving into the future. So we didn't spend a lot of our time critiquing what was there or critiquing the incumbent. We just said, this is the kind of Chicago that we believe in. We share that vision across the city and get people to buy in. And that was where we focused much of our efforts. And then we had the unexpected support of individuals who have huge reputations in Chicago. So we had Chance the Rapper, who came out.
Say his name slow?
His name is Chance the Rapper.
Okay.
Who our paths had crossed even though we never met, because he was also in the same organizing spaces that I was. So that shared commitment to education and to our neighborhoods, so it made a lot of sense. And then we were able to partner together. And that really created an awareness about this campaign that helped us significantly. And from there, it was just about trying to mobilize people to care about this election and to say, this is where you have to vote, you have to be registered, because this is the only way that you can affect what happens in city government, or it's one of the best ways to affect what happens in city government. It's not easy. I mean, the days are long. The days, 20-hour days, most days.
20-hour days.
20-hour days. Man, well, see, it felt like that.
That's right.
It felt like 20-hour days, you're all over the city. I mean, we've been to every single neighborhood in this city, getting the message out and doing it without, again, because we are sort of the outsider candidate. We were running against the status quo. We were challenging the status quo. We were not part of the establishment. And so it created excitement because people are looking for something different. So when we would campaign, they'd be so enthusiastic, finally. No baggage there, something fresh, energy. That's the response that we got. And I think it's what helped us to continue to campaign so well over the last several months.
Well, I want to kind of shift our thinking a bit, and we want to look ahead. So we are clear about the winner and what we're up to now. There are two candidates that are standing out of 14, as it probably should be. And it'd be interesting to have your take on what's next there. Yeah. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk more about now what's next in the campaign for the office of mayor. Stay with us. So, we know how you got in the race, and we have a sense of what it was like. 20 hours a day, not 8 hours a day, but 20 hours a day of working, no let up. So now the campaign is over. So what are we faced with here in the city of Chicago?
Well, I think it's going to come down to, what I know is that the people of the city want to change. They want something different. They want, they're looking for transformative change. And so what it's going to come down to is which candidate can make the case that beyond just the mayor looking different, that the substance of what comes out of City Hall will be drastically different. A lot of the biggest issues that people have talked about and that we know are the economic issues. We know that people are getting pushed out of the city, that they're getting displaced. We know that they're looking for housing, affordable housing. We know that entrepreneurs want to start businesses and they want them to be open and open successfully in Chicago. We know that we need to build generational wealth in our communities. These are the things that people are looking for. They want government to work for them. What we see now is this tale of two cities where downtown is doing well and the neighborhoods are not doing well. People want to see that changed. Not that downtown would suffer, but just to share the wealth of this city. And so either candidate has to make the case that beyond just it being an historic moment because of who's in City Hall, that the policies that come out of City Hall will do right by the communities that have been overlooked or marginalized for a very long time.
As you reflect on having campaigned with two of the two candidates that are standing and running, give us your insight as to their qualifications as well as their position on the issues as you see it.
Sure. So we've sat on many panels together throughout the course of the campaign cycle. So it was a chance to hear where they stand on the issues. I think, again, what Chicago needs is bold, visionary thinking. And so while both of them have shown that some level of understanding of the issues that are affecting us, I think they have to put forth specifics around what will tangibly change the quality of life for Chicagoans. Meaning you've got to be not just saying equity, but what does equity look like in terms of budget? I've always said on the campaign trail that equity is a line item, and we know about the city's budgetary challenges, but what does that look like for communities that deserve to get what they're entitled to? We can't just talk around the environmental justice issues because we have communities that are literally being contaminated right now. What is an environmental justice platform that addresses the needs of those communities? So they have to be very specific. This is not the time for platitudes or just saying the things that they think people want to hear. We need a detailed plan. And I think over the course of the next several weeks, my hope is that they will articulate that plan and also how to get there. That's the only way to convince people that whomever is elected, it's not just about changing the face of the fifth floor. It's about changing the policies on the fifth floor in a way that does right by all of the people of Chicago, all of our neighborhoods, and especially if we're talking about justice, to make sure that those who have been marginalized, those who haven't had a chance to participate, that they actually have a voice, because many are looking for a voice in government, that they have not felt that they've had a voice of representation thus far.
We're going to have to take a short break, and in our last segment, we're going to talk about the candidates. We got two African American women. Nobody ever thought that there would be a face-off would be between two African Americans, period.
Yes.
But for sure, not two African American women. So when we come back, we're going to discuss and wrap up our conversation with Ms. Amara Enyia. Stay with us. Well, we're here in the final segment of our program, Ms. Amara. So we've got now roughly 30 days, give or take maybe 31 days, 32, maybe 31, 32, 33 days before April the 2nd. And we've got something that no one had ever heard of or thought of, and that would be that there would be 2 African Americans running for the office of mayor. You're talking about change. That's major change.
Yeah.
And then to have 2 African American females, that's super change in terms of what the electorate would be faced with. And as you take a look, and I want you to be, I know that you're careful and you're very political in terms of answering questions, but I want to get as straight an answer as I can out of you
Sure.
on this campaign. And I'd like for you to talk about what you see as a person who has several degrees from one of the great universities of the nation, University of Illinois, and a degree in education and a law degree. And you watch these candidates, the 2 that are standing, Lori Lightfoot and Tony Preckwinkle, and give us your insight into the issues that they related to, their campaign organization, and give us some sense of of what we may watch for as we go out. And obviously, if you care to let us know who you're going to support, we'd be happy. We'd be happy to break the news to the world. But anyway, go ahead.
So what's going to be really important is, one, who has the ability to convince Chicagoans that the change that is happening is that this is real change, and B, that it's change that will move the city in the right direction. Because what we know, especially from our campaigning, is that the residents of the city are ready for change. They want a different direction. And so the challenge, in particular, that Tony faces is because being part of the establishment for so long, it's harder to make the case for change, because you've been there for a very long time. She has all the connections.
Yeah, but which candidate do you think best, as you reflect on the candidates now, on the trail, listening to them, how do you assess them? Those that are the candidate, is it Lori or is it Tony? Which one of them speaks to the change that you see?
Well, I think so. The challenge is that while Tony has a much longer track record, it's harder for her to make the case for change. But Lori also has to make the case for why she would be the right kind of change, right? She hasn't been as vetted as Tony has because she's not been in the very public position that Tony has been in, even throughout the course of this campaign. So while Tony will have a harder time making the argument for being the change, Lori also has to prove that she's the change that people of Chicago want or need. And so I see them as, it's really interesting because it's a case to be made, but they both have handicaps, if you will, that they'll have to get over, especially in making that case to Chicagoans. And then it's just a matter of looking at how what the data shows in terms of who came out and voted, who had the stronger base, who turned out more voters in more wards across the city. I think those numbers will be instructive to see who's coming out of this stronger.
Well, let me say this, and there's no question about it, Amara, that when we look at the data that came out, we have, and just on a quick take, and numbers is what I oftentimes deal with, you have Willie Wilson that drew 56,000 votes. You have Amara Enyia that drew 42,000. 56, that's 100,000 votes, rounded, right? That comes out of somebody's base. You follow me? And my sense is, the question is, where would those votes go?
Yeah.
Those are votes that went to black candidates. Or when we add up what happened with Tony and with Lori, in terms of Lori, I believe Lori ended up with a 91,000, and Tony ended up with 84,000. That's 100 and what? That's 156 with 100. So you had a 250,000 blacks voted, And if we throw in the smaller numbers, you're talking about like the 260,000 blacks that vote. The question is where they're going to go.
Yeah.
And we know that the last election for mayor, the mayor in a primary, in the general election, drew about 350,000 votes. So the balance, I think, of power could very easily be in the African American community and where they vote and how they vote. And obviously, they've got to decide between which one of those two voters it makes more sense to cast the lot.
Yeah.
And since I've tried to push you to be the soothsayer, but I think that your law degree and the Ph.D. and your master's degrees have cautioned you beyond my powers of persuasion. But I want to ask you one final question. We may elongate this program just a little bit. What's next for you?
Well,
what do you want to do?
Well, take a nap. I think for one, it was a long fight that we were in, but very well worth it. I think for me, this was always bigger than just a campaign, and it was always bigger than a job. We really used our campaign to shift the entire dialogue in this election.
Let me be right. Are you going to run for public office?
The option is definitely there in the future.
Okay, so we've got you off the west side, right?
I live on the west side.
That's Danny Davis country. And there's Danny Davis as old as I am. And so at some particular point...
That means he's a young man.
Yeah. Well, I know how old Danny is. I know how old Bobby Rush is. But Bobby Rush was one of my students when I was teaching at the University of Chicago. Oh, wow. So I know how old he is. So, but do you see yourself running for one of the Congress or running for other statewide offices in the future?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely options with statewide, federal. At this point, I think the goal has always been to do the work. Elected office is one way of doing the work. It's not the only way. And so I'd like to keep those options open. It's always about what is the position that's what's the vehicle that's the strongest to push for the change that needs to happen. And whether that's at the city level, the state level, the federal level, I want to make sure that all of those options are available. And they are all available. And then in the immediate, it's just making sure that the platform issues that I talked about are represented and live on. Whomever becomes mayor, they have to be held accountable to doing what they have said that they are going to do.
Well, I want to do this. I want to thank you very much.
Thank you
for being with us, my sister.
Thank you.
And I want to say this to our listening audience. It's been a pure plum-picking pleasure being with you one more time. I want you to know that this has been Intersections, where faith, business, and politics meet. I want you to continue to watch us. See you next week.